right, welcome back, buddy. Long camp,
Welcome.
long week. Here we are.
Yeah, it always feels, you skip 1 week and it feels like forever. Yeah, it is February 12th, year 2025. Is it still? Yeah, 2025. Welcome aboard, everybody. Listen to the Crushing Iron podcast, and this is episode 831.
Yeah, it is. And yeah, it is. It's, when you say, or what year is it, I was kind of like, I'm in the same boat, man. It's just kind of all just,
like, doesn't even matter.
So much stuff going on.
I know. There's a lot going on, a lot of planning going on, a lot of snow going on everywhere.
Except where there should be.
Yeah, exactly. Right. Like, you should be the one getting on the snow right now. So woke up to another little whiteout and less school. I think Hayden's going to have to go to third grade 7 times at the rate that they're going to school right now. But yeah, it's all good. It's not nearly as much as we got a few weeks ago, but yeah, just enough to have fun and just enough for them to pull the trigger and have no school, which also means people are back on the treadmill, which we all know is everyone's favorite. But yeah, it's that. We had a great last week at run camp. A little warmer than I think you and I would both appreciate, but nonetheless, the weather ended up being pretty good. It was like 50s, 60s most of the time. Outside of like the adventure day we had, which actually ended up being pretty much perfect weather. Definitely could use a little more sunshine, but it was awesome. Another great week. My favorite camp for sure. Just park on Tuesday. You don't leave till Sunday. You run a lot of trails. You're around a lot of people. You're around a lot of nature. You got downtime. You know, you're not watching a ton of TV. Screen time's at a minimum. You don't have to work. You know, and you're around good people having great conversations. And so yeah, it's always a great week. Draining for sure, but also uplifting and energizing, but yeah, it's hard to come back to reality, which that was reality actually, but it's you know what, unfortunately not. But yeah, good to be back, and I will give a shout out to the Philadelphia Eagles for the absolute ass beating they gave the Kansas City Chiefs.
Oh man, is there depression rolling around your area?
They're actually people are a little bit down, I think. I mean, listen, I pull for them because of location. People know I'm a diehard Dolphins fan, so I cheer for them, but I'm not like a Kansas City native and like diehard Chiefs person. But the sports complex, it's funny, like the sports complex where the hub is, Patrick Mahomes' trainer comes in and out of there a couple times a week to train other athletes, and he walked in Monday and you would have thought he got like kicked like a puppy. He looked just like uber depressed. And I mean, to be fair, Mahomes looked like garbage in that game. But yeah, one of our athletes, Michelle Lindsay at Run Camp, was rocking her Eagles jersey, and I was talking a little bit trash, just have fun with her, and she sent me a text on Monday, and I said, well, I'm not really sure I'm allowed to say these kind of words on the podcast, but we say whatever we want. So yeah, it was a total domination, and incredibly impressive. But yeah, well, a lot of people are depressed about it, but they'll get over it. It's just football.
Yeah.
I was more bummed, honestly, to see my Tennessee basketball team lose to Kentucky again. Last night. Yeah, we don't want to talk about that. I'd rather talk about the Chiefs losing than Tennessee losing to Kentucky again. Yeah, anyway, it's SSE. Moving on. So we had Run Keep, put in a lot of mileage. We're back, and today figured, you know, as we do for most camps, you know, we come back and we talk about things we learned, things we observed. And I think, you know, as a standard, and you can speak to this, I'm sure, with you get a lot of athletes there too. Is like, to me, it's always, I know we say this after every camp, it probably sounds repetitive, but it's true. It's just always amazing to me how much people can do when they're surrounded by people and doing things together, and even doing things alone. And like the one of my favorite things about these camps is that it kind of provides, like, you feel away from life, so you're not so restricted and confined. And while I don't think either one of us would suggest doing things like this on a monthly basis, it's still great to get out there and live a little and just kind of see where your body takes you on the day. And I think so many people leaving camp are always just shocked at what our bodies, to me, that's always the biggest reminder, is like, our bodies are capable of so much more than we think. And a lot of times what gets in the way of our body kind of fully expressing its full ability isn't the body, isn't the ability, isn't the age, it's our head. And not letting it explore, not letting it experiment, not letting it push its boundaries. and not kind of letting it be what it was, designed to do, was to be a machine, an endurance machine. And so I always find it interesting to kind of see people push through those things and do things they never thought possible at all these camps.
Yeah, it's always impressive, and I think those camps are really interesting too, because you are so kind of off the gridish type of a thing. And I kind of like look around, I can almost sense, and I feel it myself a little bit too, as sort of like, even though this is amazing and it's so relaxing, I think it gets a little bit, because we're not used to that feeling so much. It's always good to put it in your body, I think. But I think in a weird way, it can kind of make people anxious toward the end. It's sort of like we're kind of having too much fun or too much relaxing. But I think it's something that it's great to put in your life. It's almost like to me, it's more of a vacation than like a real vacation, sometimes, because you're actually doing stuff, and it's not like on a real vacation, it kind of like stresses you out because you're not really doing as much and physically a lot of times, and you just sit around and start thinking about what you should be doing or whatever. So I agree with you though. It's like you see so many people do so many things that they had no idea, I certainly had a couple athletes that were quote unquote, if that would have been like a traditional 50K or whatever planning, they would have been so undertrained in theory and came out and just knocked it out of the park kind of thing. So,
and I do think it also speaks a lot to stress is stress. And the daily kind of impact that stress has on it, whether it's, spousal stress or kid stress or professional stress, personal stress. You're reading the news too much. I mean, all these things that I think constantly, even on like maybe what in each kind of bucket, right? Like maybe might raise your cortisol or stress levels on a very insignificant level in their own bucket, right? You got personal stress, slight raise. You got professional stress, slight raise. You're watching things on TV or scrolling through social media or news or whatever it is, raise it, slight stress. Then you got maybe kids, slight stress. And then, combining a schedule, like having to do this and less sleep, slight stress. Well, in each individual bucket, it's insignificant, in a lot of ways, not all the time, right? If it's low level, kind of like standard living situation. But when you combine all that, that's a lot, right? It's a huge compounding stress component. And I think that obviously has an impact on your ability, and everyone would agree, like stress impairs your ability to perform at your highest level. But when you get away from it and you're able, and a lot of times I think these athletes are super shocked, like after like, a couple of days of hard running on hard terrain, they're able to do these, long runs that they would have never done on their own fresh. But I think it's to me, it's not so much about, the impressive part is like the fatigue building and then doing some endurance feat. To me, it's also like, it shows how long it takes stress to dissipate and leave your body. Right. So you might come into camp on Tuesday, but the day before you had all these stressors. Right. So your body is still going to be kind of on, have this residual stress that's carried over from the previous day. And then slowly it goes away and you let it, you're out in nature and you're out in the sun and you're outside and you're with people and you're having conversations and less screen time and less work. And slowly it just kind of like lowers and lowers and lowers. And that allows you to perform and do these things. So I think a lot of it is, being around great people and a great environment and pushing yourself. But I also think being away from all these distractions and stress, this is what allows us to perform at, your highest level. And I think that just goes to show you like how impactful life stress on a day-to-day basis, like how that impacts us and impairs us from performing our best, and how much we should respect it, right? In our training and our training prescription with what you either give yourself as a self-coached athlete or what coaches, give you. Like I had an athlete this morning who had a bike workout and she didn't hit the numbers that she had, and she like listed all these questions that were all training related. And I was like, well, first of all, I'm not sure why we have 6 questions after this one bike workout, but to me, it's none of the above. To me, the answer is, one, your husband is, not able to do the things that he's been able to do, and you have a brand new puppy, and you just told me stress was at like a pretty high level. That's why. Sometimes the simplest answer is the one we overlook because it's just part of our life, right? And so I think the lower level of stress it has a huge impact on our ability to perform.
No, yeah, I totally agree with that. But also over time, like low level, I mean, I think that shit adds up. You know, like if you've got things going on, maybe it's almost like, you don't notice it as much, but it's always kind of there. And I think sometimes it really kind of creeps up and breaks you down, and you're right about that, as far as getting that out of your life. And it's amazing what you can accomplish when you just don't have it, and you can't get rid of it, obviously. And
Exactly.
I was thinking about that. I mean, for me, it's like I actually kind of I broke down on that long day, and it's been a while, with Maddie and all that shit. I haven't really slept that much in the last month. I mean, just because I'm not making excuses. I just have a hard time sleeping sometimes, and I have for a while. And she was getting up in the middle of the night all the time. It's like a new kid or something. And that shit's real, man. And I think, with the drive down and all that, I hadn't been running a ton, and I wasn't really worried about that for some reason, but I felt good the days before. But then on the day of the long run, I broke into like, I don't like to give in to sickness or illness, but I had something, because I was creakier than I had been. I mean, that was like the sorest I've ever felt in years. And I knew something was up, and I just felt like I didn't need to push it any further, which I'm glad I didn't. And I kind of had one night of like sweats and shit, and then I felt pretty decent the next day. So, but I think that was an accumulation of stress too,
No, the grief. Like, I think grief takes the longest to leave our system than anything.
Yeah, it's very possible.
And I knew that. I told you afterwards. I knew that from seeing you in the chair. Like when you were done, I was like, man. I was like, that's just a month of grief adding up. You can, again, like you said, like even like low level, you might not acknowledge it like on a conscious level, right? Because it's something that you have dealt with every day since Maddie passed. And then obviously the difficulty of the weeks before that, and the difficulty of like making that decision. It just stockpiles, and you're just sitting there with it. And then you go out and try to do something, and your body's like, hey, like I get you want to do this, but we ain't got it. We've spent our energy the last 4 to 6 to 8 weeks, letting you be functional through all this stuff and doing what you needed to do, and then here we are. But I think it was. I also think it was fascinating that I'm not sure how you felt since the you were like headache and chills and whatever, but it was like sometimes I think like if we don't push ourselves like to like that limit to kind of like top off our stress and our thing, like we hold on to it for a long period of time. And to me, it was like your body was like, all right, you maxed me out, I'm overflowing, here's the response. And now hopefully afterwards you can start to feel better.
That's just it too, man. It's like it's the theory I've always had about like how whenever things get super, super tough, and you feel like you can't go on anymore, that's when you kind of have to just sort of accept it and push through it, because that's a breakthrough moment. And that's kind of how I've been looking at it. It's like, all right, I went to bed that night, and that was the first good night of sleep I've had in a while. I woke up kind of, drenched. And since then it's just been kind of, all right, I feel a little bit relieved, and let's get back to normal. So yeah, I agree with that.
Yeah, the body's really interesting, man. It's just like, it's wild. And that's kind of where we wanted to go today. And in terms of, we're always huge fans of, experimenting and being curious. And so I wanted to take a little bit of time to kind of share my experience at Run Camp and first and foremost, like make sure, because I hate talking about stuff like this on the podcast because people are so polarizing like one way or the other. And I'm definitely, if you listen to this for 830 episodes, you'll already know I'm not an expert in pretty much anything, but I am forever curious. And so kind of like the story of this, to be very clear, is an experiment, and it is most certainly not an endorsement for what I did. But it is a pro experiment, not pro copy and paste. And which is why I have a huge problem with like so many podcasts and interviews. There's always an agenda. There's always an outcome goal. And for me, it was a experience and an experiment that I've kind of put myself on I don't know. I mean, I think I've off the cuff mentioned it to you a few times over the last like 4 to 6 months, but about 4 or 6 months ago, I decided, I mean, which again, this is completely contradictory to everything that is, I think, being pushed mainstream wide in endurance sports, which is how many carbs can we shove in an hour? How much sugar can we shove in an hour? How much, how many calories can we consume over the course of, especially like, 70.3 in full distance. And we did a podcast on this months and months and months ago, just about, how, fueling for health, right? And thinking about what we do and how we treat our bodies, for life, right? And what we think, and they got a lot of great feedback. And, obviously we got a lot of, we got a few emails that are like, oh, that's the worst thing, for you. But sharing my experiencing is also important, because I think what it should encourage you to do is to find your own way and to find your own path. But the problem here, right, is, folks, is like, you got to put some effort into it, and you got to do it for a long period of time. And so I kind of first had this inkling at before Ironman Texas last year. I went full on. I hopped on the train. I hopped full on the marketing train of you need all these you need so many carbohydrates, and I bought like a bunch of Morton gels and packets and bars, and I was like, this has got to be the way. All the professionals are doing it. Let's see how this goes. And I always noticed that when I would just shove all these carbs and sugars down my throat, like my heart rate always started higher before these rides and before these runs. And I just had a really hard time getting my heart rate to settle. And again, like, this isn't, I don't put myself in like a certain category. I'm most certainly not a diet guy. I am kind of like a eat to live for what makes you feel the healthiest guy. And that to me is like the most important thing for people to understand, is like, I think everyone has their kind of like best suited diet for them, but I don't think really most people spend the time to figure that out. So anyway, I went kind of through the summer, and then about 4 to 6 months ago, I decided, after doing a lot of research and reading a lot of papers on both sides of the aisle, that I think I wanted to kind of like slowly minimize my daily carbohydrate intake. And that started with just sugar. Like, to me, it was just like, let's see how much sugar I can cut back. I think everyone would agree that we probably all take in way too much sugar, and I'm looking at like all the sugar I'm dumping in my body. And it actually was sparked by like making my own drink from like the Saturday app, like watching how much raw sugar I was shoving in my body. I was like, I don't know that that's actually like the most fantastic thing for me. So anyway, I went down this kind of lower carb lifestyle for me, and it comes very easy for me, because I don't ever crave, like, bread isn't my thing, and like high levels of carbs aren't my thing. Like, I love a good steak, I love salmon, I love avocado, like all these things that kind of fit the category. So that's probably another reason why I kind of felt suited to like try something like this out. And so anyway, I've been doing that, and I also kind of have gone more towards like, there's also a lot of science and research out, again, on both sides of the aisle, right? You need carbohydrates, glycogen, you need this. But the more and more things I read, I was like, this resonates with me. And I think that's a huge part of what we do in life, right? Is, like, you have to find something that resonates with you. And if it resonates with you, then you'll stick with it. And if you stick with it, then the chances are going to get good results from it. And if you get good results from it, then you kind of like self-prove what you thought was true in the beginning. But a lot of it has to do with like total buy-in. And I think a lot of people don't totally buy into things. They just kind of flirt on the exterior of what might work well. Same thing with probably like the high carb approach. Like, people dabble in it, but don't fully go all in. So they think it doesn't work. And maybe that was the same with me. Maybe I didn't go all in at the right way, and maybe progressively get, scale things up to a point. So maybe I did it wrong. And maybe in the back of my mind, I was like, this doesn't feel right to me. Like, and so I'm like, you know what? So I didn't do it very well. This one, I've been totally bought in. So the last, I think 3 months, like last 90 days, I've gone into, every single workout that I've done in the morning, completely fasted, completely. And again, a lot of them I wake up, I'm like, man, I could really use something. But and then I'd always ask myself, like, do you really want something? Or is this like the endurance junkie motto, which is like, I got to have a gel, right? You got to have a gel. You got to have sugar. You got to have a gel. And then I was like, it's more of that, like the habit of like popping a gel or popping 2 gels or, downing, like I used to, like downing like an oatmeal sandwich, right? Which is, a significant amount of sugar and carbohydrates, which again isn't bad. But for me, I was like, I think I want to just kind of experiment with myself, right? And I am most certainly not like a carnivore diet guy. I'm not a ketogenic diet guy. I think low carb is probably where I would put, or more, I would say low sugar and more mindful is kind of where I follow or where I found. And so anyway, I was texting a bunch of guys before run camp, and I told them, just kind of and again, I am also very, very, very careful of how I explain this to athletes, because as a coach, / leader, people tend to listen to what you have to say on a different level. And I appreciate and respect that level of responsibility that I have. And so I'm very careful in what I suggest. And again, like I'll probably throw in like 7 disclaimers. It's like, I'm not telling you to do this. What I am telling you to do is be curious and experiment with your body and what you feel is right. And that's what got me down this train, was reading all these articles about bonking and your body, and it's where bonking even comes from, right? There was a couple articles I read that that bonking feeling. This is kind of where I had my aha moment. Is I was reading a research paper that recently came out that was, the bonking feeling that you have, or that crash you feel in these long distance events, isn't from you needing to top off and you being out of glycogen, right? What it comes from is a hypoglycemic effect, where your baseline blood sugar lowers. And I'm sure there are going to be like doctors and medical professionals that are going to totally bash this, and I'm totally fine with that.
I agree with that on an instinct level right now, just to add in there.
What's that?
I said on an instinctual level, I agree with that, just to add this in right now.
Right. Yeah. And that's what I was like, oh, that's fascinating to me. Like, and that makes sense. So where my brain started to like rabbit hole down, because again, I'm forever curious and forever passionate about all this stuff. And I was like, well, to me, that makes sense. But so what we're doing is if all we need to do is keep our blood sugar levels, stable, then shouldn't we work to lower them so it's easier to stabilize? One, you need less carbohydrate and sugar to stabilize that, and there's less room to go hypoglycemic. And so then I thought on the other end of the spectrum, so what we're doing now with the way most people eat, which is, super high in carbohydrates and refined sugar and all this refined and processed food and super high sugars. Like, so what we're doing actually is we have already a pretty high level, which a lot of people are probably more insulin resistant than they probably would want to admit. And so what we're doing now is we already probably have a much higher level of sensitivity and higher blood sugar and insulin levels that we've had in the past. So those drop. So now we need more carbohydrates and more sugar to keep those stable. And by continuing to consume more carbohydrates and more sugar, we continually raise that baseline. So you're going to always need more. And so when I read that, and the paper didn't say this, that's kind of the rabbit hole I went. I was like, well, that makes sense to me. So why am I trying to continuously add more to just have to add more in the future? So I would do these long runs, and I did a long ride on the Sunday before run camp. I was like, I'm going to do 3 hours endurance. I'm going to do it completely fasted, and I'm going to see how long can I go? And I ended up taking total for the entire ride, I took 10 carbs an hour and a little bit less sugar over the entire ride. And I felt fantastic. No heart rate drift, no heart rate spike. What I did was, and I think it's also important to note, I don't count macros. I don't count macros. I don't count calories. All I've been doing is just like being mindful of what I eat and what I don't eat. I don't count protein. I don't count fat. I don't count carbs. I don't do any of it. I do know from about the first 2 or 3 weeks when I started doing this, I do kind of know what's going to tally up to about a 50 to 150, 200 carb level day. So I know, and I eat the same shit every day. So it's pretty easy to kind of keep track of. But my goal for this ride, after having read this article and coming up with this, again, total hypothesis, was instead of like planning out my nutrition, was to just take a swig of my only electrolyte and caloric drink, which was raw endurance, only take a swig of that when I felt like my blood sugar was dipping a bit. not a lot, just a bit. And it wasn't to smash a 30 sugar gel down my throat. It was, okay, well, if what I believe to be true about this, and it is about blood sugar levels and keeping them stable, then what I don't want is a spike. What I do want is to level. And so in order to level it, I'd have to take less in consistently than to absolutely slam some kind of a gel or down a 60 carb drink, right? So I just took like a swig, and I got off the bike after 3 hours, and I felt great. I mean, I felt incredible. And then so anyway, we go into run camp, and I'm gonna shut up in a second. You can jump in and give the feedback. But when in a run camp, I thought to myself, man, I was like, because you read again, like you can read all these articles and you can choose to believe things. And a lot of times we see what we want to see, right, out of these articles. And I read a lot of articles I've read quite a few articles on like carb renting, right? Carb renting is like where you're doing like a time trial or an event, and instead of consuming like a carbohydrate sports drink, you just put it in your mouth and you swish it around and then you spit it out. And what they showed was that it actually tricks your brain into thinking you got carbohydrates and sugar, and you start to respond differently, which people will poo-poo that, but it is the exact same thing as your banana and mustard packet in miraculously curing your muscle cramps. It's a signal to that your brain sends to your body. The banana you have, your mustard packet, your pickle juice, does not get into your bloodstream and circulate quick enough to immediately cure your cramps. It's the same thing. And I thought that was fascinating because I think most people could agree sugar is a drug. I'm pretty sure we can all agree on that. And the majority of people are 100% addicted to it. And I've been addicted to it for sure. And so anyway, I was like, you know what, I'm gonna, and you read about, all these different, like, how many calories we have on board and how much your body can actually do. And so I kept resisting over and over and over again these temptations to in my workouts to just grab a gel or to just do that. I was like, fuck it, I'm just gonna, I'm not training for the Olympics here. Like, so let's just see what happens. And I had some of the best workouts I've ever had in the last 2 or 3 weeks. I'm down 9 pounds from where I was before. I haven't been sick in 6 months. I've been like, used to get fever blisters like every 45, 60, 90 days from stress. Haven't gotten one of those in I don't know how long. So anyway, I roll into this to adventure day, where we go out on these trails, super hilly, super technical, tons of elevation, really with no plan, right? So no plan to do most people in a certain amount. It's just like, let's see, how are you feeling? That's almost, I'll probably go 2 or 3. So either between 15 to 21, 22 miles. And then just kind of see what happens. But I told myself going in, I was like, listen, I'm not looking to disprove or prove this approach, but I am going to explore this approach because I've done these before. And I mean, you've seen me, I look freaking destroyed sometimes after some of these. And so anyway, I woke up Friday morning, and I woke up, had some coffee. We're supposed to start at 6. It's like 5:45 and I'm hungry, but I'm not my sugar level wasn't low, which is 2 huge differences, right? Like I needed something in my stomach. So instead of doing my usual 2 packets of oatmeal, 2 pieces of toast, got to have my carbs, got to jack myself up on sugar, which again is going to jack up my heart rate. I went and grabbed an avocado, put a little salt on it, and a small tablespoon of peanut butter. So a few carbs and a couple sugars in that, but negligible. And then my avocado. And I also knew that would give me no stomach issues, and most certainly I knew wouldn't spike my blood sugar. And then went out. Anyway, long story short, I did a 50K, all aerobic, right? I didn't go out to the world on fire. Finishing time, 6 hours, 22 minutes. 1 beat lower heart rate from years past. Much more technical, but definitely a harder course, which I think you would agree with. Yep. And more elevation and around the same pace, but about double the distance. And through that entire run, I went through 1 packet of Element, 1 packet of Replenish, which is I think 6 carbs and electrolytes, and then 2 scoops only of this raw endurance formula, which totaled up to 42. So I maxed out at 50 carbs and only 20 sugar for the entire 6 hours and 20 minutes. And I only took swigs of drink when I felt my blood sugar teetering towards dropping. And so even these swigs are like really, really small. So it wasn't enough to like spike my heart rate.
Mm-hmm.
It was just enough to kind of keep me steady. And it was fascinating looking back at the file, like looking through the file of the race, how steady my heart rate was the entire time. Like I had no big dips, like going to real low because you can't produce enough, energy to move quickly to raise it, and no spikes from taking in, 2 shots of whatever, sugar, carbohydrate gel was. Finish it and listen, like I don't compliment myself very much, but I felt pretty good for having done a 50K, longest run of my life. And I had multiple people say, because they've seen me look really, really, really bad before. They're like, you actually look really good when you finished. And so anyway, like, I'm going to shut up, and I'd have more to say, but I'm going to shut up. But to me, it just shows like, one, the human body can do a lot more than we think. And this isn't me telling you that this approach is for you at all. I am telling you that it's super fun to dive into and experiment with your body. And instead of just always thinking about performance, think about how certain things may or may not make you feel, but then also like the amount of commitment it takes to get your body to train it the way that you think is best suited for it. And again, there's a lot to consume there. None of it's overly scientific. A lot of it's just gut like instinct, but for me, it worked.
Yeah. Literally gut instinct. So
yeah, right.
Well, obviously a lot there, and a lot that I really resonate with. The parts where you're saying that you're not, forcing a bunch of carbs in, at certain points, because that becomes the thing sometimes, I think, is like when you're jamming gels and it's like you're peaking things up and down all the time. But I love what you're talking about as far as that baseline level. And, I think it's sometimes, I think about this, like sometimes I wake up and, before we do stuff like that, and I don't really go for much and I'm just groggy or whatever. And I always talk about warming up, in the race or before the race or whatever, and get things going naturally. And I think I've always naturally done a lot of that stuff. But in the early parts of it, I feel like I'm out of it, but it slowly wakes up. I'm not forcing it with like externals. And like as you're talking, obviously you've done this for 90 days or so. And obviously you've kind of built a pattern, but also it's one of those things where I kind of always had a gut instinct that fitness really trumps nutrition a lot of times. And it just makes things easier. And if you're in better shape and you're able to do more and you're just comfortable, you're not always kind of like reaching for that external fuel all the time. And I think that this really dovetails onto something I've been rabbit holing a little bit lately, which is called dopamine loading. Have you heard this term? It's sort of like,
I have not, no.
It's just very interesting to me because it's kind of parallels what you're talking about in the sense of like, for example, the theory is that when you get up, if you immediately go to your phone or you go to coffee or you go to sugar and stuff like that, you're setting yourself up for a peak and valley kind of day. Because the theory that wannabe is like, you get into, it can be work or doing stuff that, is naturally what you're going to be doing rather than, going to screens or looking for videos or doing all these things, because then the whole day is kind of like that up and down trough. But the point of the whole thing is to keep your dopamine low in the get-go all day. And like you were saying, like blood, your sugar levels, keep them lower, because then you set your baseline. And then at, like the dopamine loading part comes in, at the end of the day. It's sort of like when you got all your work done and, because you're more excited about just doing work stuff or, productive things than getting distracted. So it's like a lot of times people go eat lunch and they'll just watch videos all lunch. And then you come back from lunch and you're not productive at all in the afternoon. It's the same kind of, I think, approach in the sense of like keeping that dopamine level low as long as you can. And yeah, I mean, I remember last year I can't remember, was last year, we ran a half marathon the day before the marathon, right? Because we were building up. And I ran that half just on water, and I was like, wow, that's kind of interesting. But so like I've always kind of been a little bit that way. And we talked about, the Saturday app, I'd always like cut it in half at least, or, maybe just throw a little half scoop of sugar in there versus like load it up. And it's amazing, when you're in good shape and, especially if you're not, especially long distance endurance type stuff, if you're doing those types of activities, I think it's worth experimenting to see how little you need,
Right.
And I love what you said about like, just when you feel it, you just kind of like, top it off a little bit rather than bury it. It's kind of like you're hungry instead of going to eat, it's like everybody is hungry on that day we had tacos. Right. And we went in and our plates were all just jammed over the top. And the minute we're done, we just couldn't do anything. It's a weird, that's a huge example, I think, of what you were saying is like, you don't want to like, you just kind of want to top things off and keep them kind of stable as possible rather than to just fill the whole tank all the time.
Yeah, no, I mean, I love what you said about the grabbing of like, and I think it's very telling, right? And in the maybe some solid truth and validity behind my thought process is like, and you talk about like, when I feel like I'm not in a place to perform well, I grab a gel, like, and that can help me get over the hump. I mean, to me, that screams like that, it's a drug / performance enhancer. Right. It's the same thing as like, hey, I've had a rough day at work. I feel like I need to grab a few beers. Right.
Mm-hmm.
How it's going to make you feel. And so I think like, and I don't think and I'm not going to disagree at all. I very, very much believe that carbs and sugar and caffeine are gigantic performance enhancers for sure. Like, I think to perform at your highest optimum level, you have to take some in. So I'm definitely not like on the other way. But if we know that to be true, then like using alcohol as an example, like, do you want to get lit off of 2 glasses of wine, or do you want to get to the point where you feel the need that you need 2 bottles
Right.
to get lit? Right. And how much consumption that goes into it, because to me, it's like there is no doubt that carbohydrates, sugar, and caffeine improve performance and give you kind of like not a placebo effect, to an extent, but like they make you operate, especially caffeine, like make you operate differently. And so the goal, I think, should be not how much can you take of this, but if we're looking to what's the right word here? If we're looking to increase the impact of that, right? It's the same way you see a lot of people cut out caffeine on race week, right? They want, and this is the reason that pros and age groupers will cut out caffeine the week before a race, because they recognize it's a drug. They want out of the system because they want the effects to be heightened when they take it. And so if that is true about caffeine, I also believe it to be true about the type of and the amount of sugar or carb you might use to get this as a performance enhancer. So wouldn't you want to only have to use the least amount of it? Plus, and I'll tell you just before like the podcast is like, I was eating this legit like 10 minutes before we're about to start our running. And I was running behind. I diddle-dalled too much, like just having coffee and being lazy. And I was like, I need something in my stomach. So I grabbed a giant avocado and sprinkled a little kosher salt on it. And I remember Jess Phillips was like, "You're going to eat that right before, like this close to running?" And I was thinking, well, if I was to eat like 2 packets of oatmeal or like down a bunch of like processed shit, no way I would do that 10 minutes before. But I was like, wait, when does an avocado ever ruin someone's stomach? Right? Or a small little tablespoon of peanut butter. Never. Like, no one's like, oh, I had a really bad avocado today. It really wrecked my stomach. No. You hear GI issues come up because the amount of sugar and processed crap that we continue to put in our bodies. And so again, like if you're thinking about, to me, like in so much of what we do with fueling in our day-to-day diets and life is like, how can I minimize certain effects and how can I maximize certain effects? How can I minimize the chances of this happening? How can I maximize the chances of this not happening? And so for me, it's like I've never heard anybody say that I had really bad gut issues from low carbohydrate and sugar counts or less water, right? It's always gel or this induced. And I think of like, and I also have like, this is total theory level here. None of it is proven and probably won't ever be proven, but I do have this gut feeling, again, that maybe just for me, but for a lot of people, is that the post, because also when I got done with this 50K, I didn't have a giant crash at like 3 or 4. Yes, was I tired? For sure. But I also like hypothesize again that the post like long ride, long run crash that so many people have in like the afternoon isn't necessarily from the exercise itself. It is coming down from the gigantic spike in insulin from all the sugar they consume during it.
Yeah.
And I think that, again, I am no scientist. I'm sure there's a lot of medical doctors rolling their eyes at everything I'm saying right now. But I also think that I have some credibility because I've experienced it with myself. And it's not like it's a one-off. It's been a 4 to 6 month process where, and again, I also think it's important to note, like, I don't think this works for you unless you change the way that you eat on a normal basis. Like same way for if you're a lower carb or you're one of these ketogenic or carnivore people, like I don't think that going like 130, 140 carbs is going to make your stomach feel very good. It's probably going to crush and crush you. Same way it goes for like if you're going to consume 600 to 700 carbs a day and endless amounts of sugar, that you're going to go into these rides, quote unquote fast, you're probably going to last 20 minutes because your blood sugar is going to tank in like 5 seconds because it's used to mainlining Fun Dip and snorting oats. So I think, again, like it took me time. I felt, none of my workouts were that great, but I just kept telling myself, like, do you really need this, or is this just like your endurance sports junkie habit? And I was telling a couple guys I was on a texter with this like the week before run camp earlier in the week. I did a really, really hard, like one of the hardest VO2 max bike rides I've ever done. I did it totally fasted and I felt incredible. Numbers are great. And then later on that day before lunch, I got in the pool to do the same type of swim. And the first thing I thought of was you better get a gel. Didn't even have like a down feeling.
Yeah.
It was just, you better get a gel. You better grab a gel. You got to have one. And I was like, why are you? And I didn't have a gel with me. And I was like, you don't need anything. Just get in and do it. And I ended up having one of my fastest swims in years. And I'm not telling you that this way of fueling is the reason for these results, because I've also been super consistent and very diligent about, my workouts and stuff. But I do feel better. And I do think it's just fun. And to me, that's like, honestly, that's the message today is like experimenting with yourself and trying to so going into this like 50K that we ended up doing, I had committed to myself and to people I told, I was like, I'm going down this route and I might go up in flames. This might go down as like the biggest failure ever. And after 2 loops, I might just come back crying in total failure and say I was wrong. Or I might come back and think, oh man, I feel pretty good about this. And there was a lot of freedom in the experimental nature of it because there was no expectation of performance or outcome. It was just like, let me see what my body can do. And I think that's, and also like, a great message is I think you can train your body to do anything. I think we've all noticed that. Like you can train it to do anything, whether it's endurance, whether it's how your body responds. But I think I don't think you were around for this, but I was on a semi soapbox here, but before the 50K, and I was talking to a couple guys, and one of the athletes there actually said, he was a little bit older, you'll know who I'm talking about. Mr. Newsletter. We were talking, and he said, well, 4 or 5 years ago, I actually used a certain company. I won't name the name, a certain coaching company, and they also do fueling. And he said they were very, 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 very high carb on everything that you do. And he said, I ended up going to the doctor and I was pre-diabetic. Mm. And then he said, so I immediately switched, went to a different company, different way of thinking. And he said, and I went and got my A1C checked, and I was no longer pre-diabetic, and my A1C had gone from like 7.5 down to 5. And again, I think all this is very, 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 very dependent from person to person. But to me, I was like, see, like that resonates with me. And it wasn't like it was proof to him that when the change he needed to make, And the way that I felt, I was like, I don't feel that I'm operating at a high enough level. And you know what the hell, why not experiment with it? So in a world where we're consistently having all these things shoved down our throat and everyone has an agenda, I think it's like, why not be, and again, it takes a lot of research and it takes a lot of thought, honestly. And the thing is, you got to stick with it. Like you have to stick with it. You can't, whatever you choose, like in order to, just like training, right? Like you train athlete for a few weeks, like, I don't think this is working. Like, that's not how it works. Like, you got to do this for like months, which is also why like a lot of these clinical and research, like groups they do, it's like, oh, for 1 week or for that's not long enough. Like, but that's the problem with so many of these research papers and trials is they can't get people to adhere to these protocols for long enough to get really good, true, like meaningful results. So yes, while I agree everyone is different, I also think train your body to do amazing things. And ultimately, like, listen to your gut, right? Like I just said, like, it sounds crazy and in the literal speak, but like if you feel something is off, then go down that rabbit hole. And it's just fun, right? And do I know that I'll operate like this forever? No. But I do think, like, if it comes down to like racing at the top level will make me have to consume way more stuff, I don't know that I'm in for that. Just because I know that how I feel on a day-to-day basis is so much better, I'm not sure I'd be willing to sacrifice that.
Yeah.
And I just think that's just a lot there's a lot out there, and I just think, again, I didn't want to share a story because it's polarizing one way or the other on the pendulum of fueling and consumption or male versus female or this diet versus that. It was just more of a sharing of like, be forever curious and don't be afraid to just like to own your own journey. And if it makes sense to you and only you, that's all that matters, because then you'll stick with it. And then that's when you see if it's worth continuing to do or it's not worth continuing to do.
Yeah. I used to have a t-shirt company with this dude, and our slogan back then was, it's all in the mind. And I thought of that when you were talking about the pickle juice stuff and how, people think it goes into the gut and solves cramps or whatever, or like that dopamine stuff, or how, when you have a cup of coffee, it isn't like fueling your body necessarily. It's just kind of jacking up your brain a little bit. And I think that can be, that's what we talk about, running with music. And I mean, it does, there's something that goes on up there. And if your brain is clicking, and you think about like how, I would say almost 90% of triathletes have, had gut issues in races or whatever. And then you have to just start asking yourself questions. It's like me last year at Wisconsin, I did the same thing. I kind of trained on a lighter fuel scale for the whole time. I experimented here and there, and we talk about training your gut, and I certainly didn't do that for what I did that day. And I was just absolutely completely jacked during that race because I went into this, like you did with the gel before the swim, it's like, I need. And I've talked to people, and this is like maybe an anecdote that maybe relates or not, but like during the marathon, I don't necessarily think I had any gels last year, and I felt okay. I mean, other than my stomach, but I finally got that turned around by having, basically water and a few Cokes towards the end, and my gut started feeling better. I don't know if that's just because, who knows, but I'm just saying that I got through a marathon basically without fuel at the end of an Ironman, and it wasn't a great marathon, but it was okay. I mean, it was decent. So it's interesting. I do agree with you 100%. It's like, to me, I look at things like they're a puzzle. And the challenge I usually have is what you're talking about, is I don't like give it enough time or whatever. And that's just the nature of our beast these days. We want solutions like overnight, and we can be skewed by, some kind of reaction that might seem like it works, but it doesn't always work in the long term. And for me, it's like, I think about sun and energy and water and electricity and stuff like that. I feel like that at the core of everything really is what our body moves on. And we probably tend to over fuel and overeat a lot of times. And I do think a lot of that is in the mind, and like you're feeling like a hole, you're trying to fill a hole up or something in the gut sometimes. And I know I get that feeling. It's like, it's sort of that comfort food vibe, that we confuse and becomes our, safety rail for training. So yeah, I'm open for the experiments, man.
Right. Yeah. I mean, I think that's, experiment, and also, question, what which is also a giant problem in America these days, is like, question why you believe what you believe, or why do you follow a certain pattern or a certain belief system or a certain, agenda? Do you really have any conviction, or you just do it to do it? And that's kind of the hole I went down. I was like, why do you, what makes sense to you? And if it makes sense to you, then on a lot of levels, I think it's your body and your brain trying to tell you something. It's like, this probably is, the way, you could do things. And that does make a lot of sense to me. And also your body changes and it needs different things over certain periods of your life. And you can also train it to be, certain ways, I know this to be true. Like, I know nothing last year, but like a couple years before that, like if I did workouts and, I didn't eat quick enough, like I would get that, like, kind of hot, sweaty feeling, like your insulin level drops. I don't know the last time I've gotten that. So I'll be interested to see, like, if I get any blood work, like how much lower my blood sugar is gone, like just on a standard baseline. I just don't ever have it anymore. I don't get that like shaky, sweaty, feeling. I don't ever get it. I don't get it like in the middle of the day. I don't get it in the afternoon. I don't ever get it. I don't get it after a workout. And even after, like, we're talking like a super hard VO2 max for an hour and 10 minutes where I did it totally fasted on water. And the night before I had a steak. And I felt totally fine. And so it just begs the question, like, is it really what I need is more glycogen than our body has plenty of it? Or is I just became addicted to needing sugar. And so it raised my blood sugar. And then, small note is like, you also got to remember, right, that this huge high carb approach, everything also follows one thing: the almighty dollar. And it's really, really hard to sell water and less, right? You can't sell that. You can sell packs of Martin for $6 a packet, or SIS gels for $17 a packet, or subscriptions to the feed, and you can get sponsorships, and you can spend hundreds and hundreds of dollars of all this processed shit that we're telling yourself to put in your body. That's very easy to market, and you can pay pros to do it, and then they just tell you to do it because they get money for it. Like, just don't forget, like, you can always, it all comes down to the mighty dollar. How much money can we make? And there's no money to be made in the less category. $0. Right? That's why sugar companies are so, like, they paid for, anyway, I'm talking a rabbit hole, but like, we were talking about science before this, and it was like, I was listening to a podcast from camp about all this research came out about how you don't need as much sugar and carbohydrates, and cereals and all these things we started consuming like the 70s and 80s were bad for us. And the big sugar companies, which pretty much run a lot of things, bought and purchased their own study that was like, oh, no, you have to have this. And so it's just like, I think it's always a good reminder, even though we forget about it a lot, I think, is like, money makes the world go round. And, I've never heard anybody make a lot of money from, being sponsored by tap water or a little bit of salt or, like a small, like electrolyte drink. It's all fascinating to me and really interesting because it makes me go down, rabbit holes that because don't get me wrong, if there's some stuff that I read and I'm like, that's not, no, even like that swings towards more of what I believe, I'll read or listen to something and I'll just think to myself, that's way too polarizing to be true. Right. And like we said before, if it leads with like the science is settled, I'm like, that's not what science really is. Right. And so it's like, and so I immediately don't read it, or I read it with like 16 grains of salt versus like 1, because I know that there's probably an agenda, to everything. But there's, again, like I think there's a lot to be explored. And honestly, on a very honest, sincere level, I do think we have gone way, way, way towards the overly processed, overly sugared culture. I don't think anybody would disagree with that. I mean, it was fun. Like, I walked into the local grocery store to buy a freaking steak, and for the price of the steak I got, I could have bought 19 boxes of cereal.
Yeah, for sure.
And
man.
you're like, and you wonder how we got here. You wonder how we got here. And that's just another challenge, right? Of fresh and natural and organic foods are so much more expensive than like the bagged, packaged, processed shit that a lot of us eat. Sometimes it's easier, it's quicker, right? And so we're busier than ever. So we have less time to make as much food, and to do it ourselves. So we go out to eat more, or we buy more stuff that's easy to make and quick, and it's not good for us. And then we just repeat. And instead of it takes effort. It takes more effort these days because of how we've structured our life in America to do this. And then it also, like, our attention span is so weak that it makes it even harder to stick with it, because then you get distracted by something else and something else and something else. And I think, because, I mean, and this is coming from a guy, if you go back and listen, like the first 100, 200 podcasts, like I was that guy that was like, hey, you need to take down as many carbohydrates as possible. Like I've been on that train. And I'm not saying it's wrong for a lot of people, but I'm saying, do yourself do yourself justice and not a disservice in trying to figure out what's best for you and your body. And that goes for everybody. Don't listen or read a book that says every female should do this and every male should do this. That's not true, because anything can be done for any person if you find your specific right way. You just got to put in a little bit of effort to find it.
Yeah, and I'll just end on I've always questioned how I feel after Ironman. Not in a not in a just like, man, I did a lot of hard work, but just like this weird kind of, I don't know, it's always that sugary gel feeling, that you get in bed and you're exhausted, but you can't sleep, you're just wired, all that stuff kind of. I've always wondered about that, and this last weekend when I did that first loop, I was planning to go as far, I was trying to go long, and I thought, well, when I got almost done with that first loop, man, I put in a gel actually, and I got that feeling like I have at Ironman, and I was like, this is just the worst, and so I've always kind of questioned that. I don't know, exactly what the solution is, but like, I do think that sometimes just disrupting, it's almost like the thermostat in your body, or the, you talk about the sweats, or like, that's kind of the feeling I was getting. And I was definitely taking a different approach than you on the sugar, because it's just sitting there and I was just plowing down. I wonder sometimes if that just gets out of whack, that, you like those old cars used to have thermostats lock up in them. Mm-hmm. And I just feel like that at my core is what happened. And that's why I think sometimes that can really, frankly, relate to, regulation of your body. And that, to me, almost can sometimes invoke that quote unquote sickness thing that we feel. You know what I mean? It's like, I'm getting sick. Well, your body's just not working right. you know, and I think a lot of times I am the culprit. So I just think that's something to think about, man, because we can disrupt the chemistry or the landscape of our body, and it's not working right. And that's the feeling, you know?
Yeah. I mean, again, we could talk for a day and a half about this, but kind of makes you wonder, like, you know, is that, you know, you can't sleep, you know, obviously it could be the caffeine, it could be you're restless, but like, honestly, like if you think about it, for a lot of people, it's probably just damage on damage.
Yeah.
Right. You're doing damage to your body, and then you're doing damage on what you're consuming to keep your body moving. Right. So no one would say, like, you know, a tremendous amounts of processed powders and gels and crap and what you eat in the tent afterwards is really, really good for you on a recovery scale. So you go damage on damage, and then you're not like, and then you're like, I wonder why I can't sleep. Because again, if you think about it, like for me, because Ironman is for 98% of the population is a 100% aerobic endeavor.
Yeah.
So it's not like your heart rate's like spiked super high, or like for me, like if I do like a long ride, I could do one before bed and sleep perfectly fine, and then wake up with a normal resting heart rate. If I do a workout late in the day and I go like really, really, really high VO2 max interval session, I might have trouble sleeping, and I know my heart rate's a little higher. Like kind of like when I would go play tennis in the summer, high intensity, super hot, super high, you know, really, really high stress in the intensity. I sleep like crap, and I usually not eat that great afterwards too. But like, so if you think about like the damage on damage we do, it's like it's no wonder we can't sleep. It's all very interesting.
It is. It's fun to explore. I'll tell you that.
It is fun to explore. So go explore. That's all we got for today. Hope you guys enjoyed the talk through, and appreciate it. Hope you got something out of it, or even if you didn't, hopefully it piqued your interest to not to go one specific direction, but to, you know, do your own experiment and see what happens. As always, we love you guys. We appreciate you. Go to our website, c26triathlon.com. It's our one-stop shop for all things coaching, camps, and community. If you need anything from Mike, he's available. Mike at c26triathlon.com. If you need anything from me, I'm at Robbie at c26triathlon.com.
All right, man.
All right, dude. Catch you later.
Yep. See you.